All right. It is Monday evening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and we've got a great conversation we're going to have tonight about computer science professional development summer opportunities, and I'm going to hand it off to Deepa to lead us on this.
Hi, everybody. This is Deepa Muralidhar here, and welcome to our last webinar of the series for the year 2017-2018. I'm so excited to be here today. The topic for our webinar today is professional development summer opportunities. How do you pick one that works for you? I think we all, teachers, PD providers, professors, everyone who's in the CS Ed community right now, somehow we are involved in either getting ready for professional development, giving one, taking one, trying to schedule one. There's just a lot going on, and there's just plenty of opportunities. I remember 18, 19 years ago when I first was a classroom teacher, across there was one professional development workshop for College Board, provided by College Board on APCSA. And I had to travel like about maybe an hour and a half every day, and I had to put the whole thing out of my pocket. And now there are opportunities where people are just seeking teachers to come and get trained. And so here, I'm excited to have that discussion here about the various opportunities that we have. I'm no stranger to you guys. I am a high school teacher here in Georgia. I teach at Roswell High School in Roswell, Georgia. I am the co-founder and current president for Georgia CSCA, and I have about and I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science by way of qualifications in the education field. I'd like to first introduce you to Carol Fleischer. Carol, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Please feel free to correct me when I hand over the mic to you. I am so excited Carol's online on the air today with us. She's the Deputy Director of the Center for STEM Education at UT Austin, Director of statewide PD programs such as We Teach CS and TRC. She was the chair of the Texas Computer Science Task Force and member of the CS for Texas Steering Committee. More than anything else, when I spoke to Carol about this webinar, what I was absolutely stunned was the boundless amount of energy and passion for this subject and for wanting to make a difference in for teachers. I am a huge fan. I follow her tweets very regularly, and some of the thoughts and ideas are completely groundbreaking. You have to believe my word for this. I keep myself fairly occupied by reading a lot of information, and some of the thoughts and ideas that Carol has really got me thinking, yeah, why don't we try that? So I'm so excited to have Carol here, and I'm going to hand the mic to her so that she can share some of her pearls of wisdom.
Hey, thank you, Deepa. Appreciate it. I enjoy the opportunity to speak with you guys today, and excited about all of the professional development opportunities, as Deepa said, that are available to folks who are interested in either becoming new computer science teachers or folks who have been doing this for a while and are interested in broadening their skill set. Our We Teach CS program is a program that's based here in Texas at UT Austin, but we actually have found, because we do professional development that's both in person and online, that we have teachers not only from other states like Georgia and North Carolina and Wisconsin and Arkansas that are taking our courses, but also people from all over the world have taken our Foundations of Computer Science for Teachers course. So we're really excited about the place that computer science is in right now and happy to contribute.
Great. I must put in a word as well on the the foundations course. Here in Georgia, I've had several teachers take that course, and they tell me that really their fundamental understanding of computer science, their enthusiasm has gone up, and they feel at least a little more educated, so that when they go do their research on trying to see, excuse me guys, I had to sneeze, I apologize. When they go do their research on what needs to be met for their classroom, their lesson plans, this fundamental concept has really helped them be a more effective teacher. So I highly endorse this course if you are looking for one opportunity. I'd like to introduce our next panelist online with us today, a very, very old friend of mine. Gosh, I don't even know. At this point, I think we're looking at 6 or 7 years going. Brooke Osborne. She's the education manager at code.org. She develops the professional development for K-12 teachers. She worked as a pilot and outreach coordinator for CSP, Computer Science Principles course, before it became APCS Principles. And she's a former director of outreach in the CS department at Duke. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to meet Brooke through the code.org professional development opportunity, but Brooke has this amazing, vivacious smile, boundless energy and passion, and one of the nicest, fun people to hang around with. It was since Georgia and North Carolina are neighboring states, I had the opportunity to once hang out with her and have coffee as well, and she's just a real, real fun person. So, you know, I don't want to just tell you about her being as a good friend of mine. Brooke has really worked very, very hard to get the code.org professional development to be as popular and as effective as it is. I'd like to give the mic to her for a minute so that she can tell us more about it. Brooke, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Deepa, and thank you so much for having me on this panel tonight. I'm really, really excited to talk to folks about professional development opportunities for CS principals. As Deepa mentioned, we've known each other for, I think it is 6 or 7 years now, and we originally met years ago when the CS Principles course was just being piloted by the College Board. And as Deepa mentioned, I managed the pilot outreach process during that whole development of the AP course and the AP exam. So it's really great that we're at a point in the existence of CS Principles where there are teachers who want to get professional development and want to start teaching it and are coming to calls like this one to talk a little bit about what their opportunities are. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm excited to share ideas and hear questions from folks. I think a little bit about the work that I do. Code.org is a national nonprofit, well, an international nonprofit really, I guess. But the work I do is focused here in the States. It's focused on providing professional development opportunities for K-12 teachers. The CS Principles program in particular is available in all across the country. It is managed by our regional partners. So Code.org has a network of over 50 partners across the country that actually do things like run professional development and support teachers on the ground and help them implement courses. And we do have an intensive summer program followed by a year-long academic set of workshops to support teachers who are new to teaching CS. Sort of like Carol mentioned, we have folks coming to us from really broad backgrounds, many of whom have never even taken a computer science class, much less taught one. So we do try to focus on providing supports to the new to computer science teacher. And our workshops actually just kicked off today. Our first summer workshop of the 2018 summer happened today. We had, I think, a handful of them happening across the country, actually. So we are in full swing with teacher preparation, and like Carol, we're looking to support teachers who are interested in learning more about CS Principles.
Great.
And this is Joey Wilson. I just wanted to jump in real quickly since we have a few new people on here. We've got a small enough group of people as participants. I've unmuted you all, so please feel free as we're talking to unmute yourself if you have yourself muted on your end, and ask questions. This is we've got a small enough crew of people, so please feel free to jump in if you do have specific questions. You can either do it on the phone or in the chat box.
Great. Thank you, Joey. And that makes it so easy for me to jump onto that as well. This is really exciting because we can really have a honest, open conversation on what a true PD should look like. And I'm looking forward to listening to all 5 of you participants. Thank you for coming this evening. Please interrupt us at any point of time. Raise your hand, put a message in the chat window, and let's just talk to understand. Our goal is here to really figure out what is it that we need to make a good professional development workshop. What makes one successful? What is it that will make a difference so that a teacher feels, all right, I must go for this workshop. Once they go and come back, they feel, yeah, this was a really good one. When you listen to another teacher, I do this across the country. I go talking to teachers who've gone to all kinds of workshops, and I hear them talk among each other and say, oh, well, I wish I'd gone to that. Oh, this was not very good. So this webinar is intended to be a recording where teachers would probably go and listen and say, I see, so this is what we should look for. All right, when I now sign up for a workshop, this is the questions I'm going to ask. And I know that my time, my valuable summer time is spent productively. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first question. Again, thank you all for being here at this very important webinar this evening. And Joey, thank you for making this happen. So the first question is, what are the key components of a teacher PD? Either, in general, let's just take anything, computer science or any STEM related. I think we can stick to STEM. So STEM related PD, what would be a key component? Carol, would you mind starting this conversation?
Sure. I think one of the most important things is that when you go to professional development, you expect that the facilitator or the instructor is modeling the kinds of high-quality instructional practices that you would want to see in your own classroom. That matters whether it's computer science or STEM, any other STEM field. So ensuring that it's not a, didactic lecture-based format, that it's actually done in a way that actually reflects what we know and understand about good teaching and learning. So even if it is meant to primarily focus on kind of transmission of content, it should be modeling those things. And then secondly, I think it's super important that it's contextualized so that whatever you are learning, we do a lot of work to help teachers build their own content knowledge in math, science, and computer science. But what we try to do is ensure that that's not disconnected from their work as classroom teachers. So we try to contextualize that learning all within situated all within the kind of being a classroom teacher and how they would use this content as a classroom teacher. So it's not just content for content's sake. So those are kind of two of the big things that I would start off by saying any PD should offer.
Great. I really do agree with you. The modeling is the key. Years ago, I remember sitting in a PD. It was like a one-day state-mandated training that I needed to go, so that we tried and understood what if we had like a high-end or a very, very cognitive ability-wise low-end student, what would we do? And I remember the teacher or the trainer walking close to us, and she said that, watch how I'm walking. I'm trying to model how you should be doing in the classroom. And I never went back. I mean, it's been 20 years, and I still remember the tone of her voice, the way she walked. So you're right, the modeling is extremely important. Brooke, thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think both of Carol's points, the idea of modeling and teaching content in the context of what you'll do in the classroom, those are both in service of another key point that I try to keep at the top of my mind at all times, which is that everything should be actionable. You should, as a teacher, you should walk away from a professional learning experience with a set of ideas and a set of strategies that you can use in your classroom the next time you walk into it. And modeling is a great strategy for sort of infusing those actionable and concrete things that a teacher can use. And so is this idea of teaching content in the context of the classroom. I'm trying to enunciate so content and context sound different. I think, and in addition to that, something that I would add is really a reminder that learning, I mean, we know a lot about how learning works, it turns out. And learning is the process where you're constructing new knowledge by modifying your existing knowledge. So as a teacher, engaging in a professional development opportunity, I think you should be looking for places and times where you're going to have opportunities to activate your prior knowledge, because that's how we learn most effectively, when we can build on what we already know and we can apply the new thing that we're learning to this context that we already have some familiarity with. So certainly when I'm developing professional development and when I think about a key component of teacher PD, I think respecting that prior knowledge and prior experience and actively using it as a tool in the context of our workshop is a really big piece of that. And then the last thing that I would add is that, excuse me, sorry, is that, and this goes to the modeling and this goes to the content in the context of what you'll do, but we really should have PD reflect how we know people learn. So teachers are learning in a way that is true both to like what we know about learning and knowledge acquisition in general, but also so teachers are able to have some empathy with their student experience, and modeling can come into play really nicely with this. Like the example that Deepa just gave, I think, is a great example of developing empathy and understanding for what needs to happen in the classroom. So I don't think this is a new or additional component. It's just a slight reframing of what we've already talked about with modeling and contextualizing what you're learning, and also thinking about the acquisition of knowledge, but really looking at that as an empathy building opportunity to understand, how people are learning and what that effective structure needs to look like, and using that as some space and time to really understand what your student experience looks like.
And Deepa, I would add one more thing onto that that's kind of piggybacking on what Brooke said about like feeling like you're leaving with an action item or something like that, and feeling like you're tapping into your prior knowledge. I think it's incredibly important, particularly in this day and age, for classroom teachers to, when you go to professional development, the people who are providing that need to see you as a professional and treat you as a professional, not someone that needs to be fixed, or not someone who is coming like a blank slate and doesn't know what they're doing, and they're there to help you understand that. It is incredibly important that professional development providers value the deep well of knowledge that the typical classroom teacher brings with them to an experience. So when we work with teachers who are not computer science teachers, they may be math or science or social studies teachers or pre-K teachers even, and we're working to help them to become computer science teachers. The one thing that we know is these are people that have committed to being a teacher as a career, and they've been doing it for a while, and so they have a deep wealth of knowledge to bring about what their students know, how their students' experiences influence what they learn. And if you're in a professional development experience where the providers don't really respect that wealth of knowledge that you bring to the table, then you should find a different professional development experience because you are a professional, and you are just have a set of knowledge and skills that may be in a different area than what that PD provider has.
Oh, thank you so much.
I could not agree with that more.
You've just
I think
spoken
that's
something.
hugely important.
Yeah, totally. Gosh, you've just spoken something that's very, very deep and important to my heart. Respect. That's just that one word for that. absolutely don't talk down on the teacher. Respect the teacher for what they do. And Brooke, you bring a very nice point about the fact that we do know a lot of how learning happens. I'm wondering if that should be a component for in a workshop, like when designing a workshop, maybe should a small section of the workshop be in just having teachers read material or maybe go through a discussion with the trainer on how learning happens. It's food for thought. But this is excellent. I'd like to go to the second question and then open the floor for our audience to talk, but let me just try to address the second question, which is very closely related to our first question. What training would be unique to computer science education? That is, what would make computer science training session different from another math or science training? Carol, thoughts?
For us, that's been, we focus on basically teacher content knowledge, pedagogical strategies, and equity in CS courses. And so I think one of the things that may be new, besides the obvious part about just the content, is the enormous challenge we face in broadening participation in computer science education. And so I think the thing that may be unique is really honing in on those equity strategies, and NCWIT is a great resource for this, but honing in on what do I need to do explicitly to not only recruit diverse students who traditionally haven't taken CS to my courses, but also to make them feel safe and successful and supported while they're in my courses, and to ensure that the kind of community outside of my classroom is also messaging that same thing. And I think that's kind of unique to CS, because what we see is in many other fields in STEM, there's a much greater parity, for instance, between men and women, or young men and young women in high school courses. But in computer science, we're nowhere near parity. And so I think we have to be a lot more active and explicit about what are we doing both in our classroom and outside our classroom to solve that problem.
Right, equity. Thoughts, Brooke?
I can just add to that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Carol said this, and I'm clarifying that because I want to be clear that I know she said it, and I want to call it out because it's very important. Carol pointed out that this isn't just about talking about recruiting to get girls and students of color in your classroom. It's also about making them comfortable and welcome and successful once they're there. And I think that is huge, and that is something that I think as a community, there certainly are resources. NCWIT, as Carol mentioned, is a great resource for that, but that is, as a community, something that we have to tackle head on. We are solving issues related to recruitment, but then we're also solving issues related to retention, and that is very, very important. And I don't want it to get lost. I feel like often when we have discussions about equity, that gets bubbled up into, well, how do I recruit and what does effective recruiting look like? And I think Carol made the point, and I just wanted to reiterate that it's more than just getting butts in seats. It's about making sure those students actually have space to learn.
Right. So because I'm not very clear, I want to pose this to both of you. Are you just referring to girls of color or just girls in general?
I think both of those are hugely important. I mean, if you look at just the, women in computing careers, the smallest number or percent is Latino women, and it's like less than 1%. And I think African American women is maybe 2. I don't know. It's bad, but that intersectionality is important. But women in general, in the state of Texas, we've actually done a really good job of diversifying from a ethnicity perspective and from an income perspective, the kinds of students that are taking our computer science courses. What we have not been successful at as yet is getting more women to take our courses. And I think it's because we just have not had enough of an explicit focus on strategies for doing that successfully. We've talked a lot about the importance of it, but that's not the same thing as actually giving teachers tools that they need in order to make that change in enrollment and success in our classrooms.
Great. Thank you. This is incredibly valuable. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Carol. Thoughts from the audience? Questions? I'm very interested to know what you guys think. This is definitely a challenge, right? I call it like, it's kind of like when you're trying to stuff pasta, right? I make that analogy. The pasta, it could be a shell or you could be making a lasagna, but the kind of cheese is now different. And CS is a different kind of cheese is what I make fun of when I talk to people of like the math folks. And so CS is different. So I'm very interested to hear from the audience. What are your thoughts? What do you, from your perspective, what are the challenges that we run in teaching CS?
Just a reminder, everyone, you can either unmute yourself or you can type it into the chat box. Looks like June is typing right now, so we'll wait.
And I think Ellen
modeling wait time.
Yeah. I think Ellen and Al might be on the phone connected as opposed to a computer, so they're not able to type. But it's not.
So they can, I think, ask, right, Joey?
Mm-hmm.
Should be able to just unmute yourself and chat.
Yeah. So I'm going to read it out for the benefit of.
Oh, go ahead, Deepa.
Go on, Joey. Joey, go ahead.
Okay, so June mentioned, one challenge that I wonder about is differentiating for teachers with different backgrounds in computer science.
Yep, that's a huge, huge challenge for an instructor, a professional development provider. And what I find interesting, June, is when you'll talk to people particularly people who maybe are content experts at the university level, but maybe don't have as much experience actually doing professional development. And this is not unique to CS. I found it with physics professors and others as well. They will say, well, I just need to limit who gets to take my PD to only these kinds of teachers. Either it has to be the new teacher or it has to be the experienced teacher. And my response to that is, classroom teachers deal with that diversity all the time. You just need to figure out how to deal with it as a professional development provider as well. You can't use that as an excuse or as a crutch, because the teachers you're working with don't get to use that as an excuse or crutch. That I'm just going to, separate out the kids who either don't know this well enough or, ensure I have the honors class versus the regular class so it's easier to teach. You differentiate as a teacher. So as a professional development provider, one of the ways that I think that we have to learn how to differentiate, and this is what we encourage our classroom teachers to do as well, is there's sometimes as much learning can be had across participants, teachers, as it is from instructor to teacher. And so that's one of the ways that we can ensure that we're addressing that broad range of needs. We find that particularly in our rural communities where it's hard to get really an economy of scale. So we have teachers, who have 10 years of experience in working with teachers who are just brand new. And so, differentiating by having some situations or some experiences in which they're separated and they're going in two different pathways versus some where they're all coming together. Also, that project-based learning allows, not only does it allow students to expand based on, build from where they go and expand beyond, but it also allows that for teachers. And so if you're doing professional development that is project-based as well, then you give teachers that flexibility regardless of what their entry point is into the system.
Oh, thank you, Carol.
A couple of quick things to add to that before we move on. I think that a lot of this goes back to the respect thing that we were talking about earlier, and understanding that teachers come in as whole people with lots of different prior experiences and lots of different prior knowledge, and some of that might be content knowledge for some people, and it is possible to simultaneously respect that prior knowledge and also be aware of the fact that that person might still have room to grow. I think particularly in a course like CS Principles, where there's a lot of content that even seasoned computer science teachers who have taught APCSA for many years have never had to think about. So there's an opportunity from a content side. There's an opportunity for those folks to grow. There's also an opportunity for them to potentially learn new teaching practices or classroom strategies that they haven't been employing in their CS classes right now. So the idea that that differentiation only needs to happen based on background in CS is kind of limiting, because it turns out that in addition to having different levels of background in CS, the teachers who come into workshops also have different levels of experience in group-based learning or project-based learning, or they have different levels of experience with sort of like tactile and unplugged activities versus online activities. I mean, we have a wide variety and diversity of teacher experiences that need to be respected across the board. And I absolutely agree with Carol, and this is the basis of our whole professional learning model, is that these teachers will learn more from one another than they will ever learn from a facilitator at the front of the room. There are 30 other teachers in the room and there's only one facilitator. You're definitely going to learn more from your peers. And that could come in the form of learning content from a peer who already has some content expertise, or it could come in the form of learning a cool practice or strategy that you didn't know before. But I think all of this boils down to that respect piece that we talked about before, and how people have their whole body of lived experience that needs to be taken into account when they come into a workshop.
Outstanding. So I want to highlight purely for those who are listening through the recording, just like you as a teacher differentiate subconsciously in the classroom. That's expected out of us as a teacher. When you walk into a workshop, expect that out of the professional development provider. And the differentiation does not only have to be with or without CS background. It could be with various levels of CS knowledge that you're walking into the workshop. And you still need to expect that your professional development provider is able to take care of the knowledge that you have and give you more enrichment. That's what we do as teachers. As a message to professional development providers, that's our job. That's what is expected for a workshop to be called good. And at this day and age where CS is so critical right now, and training teachers is so important, it's absolutely vital that we reach every teacher, no matter what kind of background, CS, not CS, level of experience, type of CS teaching that they have done, project-based, tactile, etc. Thank you so much for this outstanding responses. Moving on to the third question. How is an online TD different from face-to-face one, besides the obvious advantages and disadvantages? Brooke, can we start with you? I know that code.org has a lot of online TD, so your thoughts, please.
Yeah, of course. I think there are a lot of differences in an online versus in-person environment, and I don't want to take for granted that everyone views the advantages and disadvantages as necessarily obvious, but I'm going to run through a couple of trade-offs that I think exist for an online experience versus an in-person experience. I think the first big trade-off, which might be obvious but is worth noting, is that you aren't actually in person with folks, and for some people who need face-to-face in-person connection, both to keep themselves accountable and in order to feel like a piece of a community, that can be a hard balance to strike, to feel like you're forming community and building relationships with people without sitting in the same room as them. So I think for some people that's not a problem, but for others that is a big disadvantage, and it is the trade-off that you get by being able to do PD in your sweatpants sitting in your office instead of participating in PD in person at a workshop. I think there's also a lot of just sort of from a professional development provider perspective, there's a lot of logistical stuff that's going to be different about the activities that you do. So for example, when we host a workshop, that's going to be 6.5 hours of content that we cover in a day. I can't give you 6.5 hours of virtual content and ask you to just like chug coffee and hang out with me and do those activities on the computer. So the pacing is going to be really different. And as a result of that pacing, there's likely going to be more accountability put back on you to do activities sort of asynchronously or on your own in order to come together in a virtual setting. And this is going to be true whether or not there are whole group virtual components or if the whole thing is asynchronous. There are going to be these pieces that you need to do on your own, either to submit or to have ready to talk about with other people also participating in the online PD. And that is just a sort of a fundamentally different approach than what you'll experience in an in-person workshop. So those are sort of like from a logistics angle and from a personal comfort angle. I also think it's worth noting that the types of activities that you can do in person are a little different than the types of activities that you can do online. And you are going to find that some of the discussions that you would have in person or even discussions that you would have in a synchronous call like we're on right now have the potential to be different than discussions you would have in a forum. So I think it's not just about online versus in person, it's also about thinking about the types of online experiences that you have access to. And really a lot of this, like there's no right answer, there's no good, there's no one thing that's good for everything or one thing that's bad for everyone. It's about finding the thing that works best for your needs, but understanding those trade-offs is I think really important. So I think the buckets that I would encourage you to think about when you're considering the differences between online and in person, start with your own personal comfort. Like, are you going to feel limited by the fact that you're forging relationships by talking to someone through a computer versus in person? The logistics and mechanics of sort of experiencing content spread out over time, and having that sort of self-motivated accountability to get stuff done because it is spaced out over time instead of condensed down. And then the last piece being just like the types of activities you're going to do. Is it all asynchronous? Is it a mix of synchronous and asynchronous? And thinking about what that means for the types of support you'll get and the types of conversations that you'll have, and just what works best for you.
Great. This is absolutely valuable because I saw so many posts on Facebook on the discussion group saying, this summer I can't travel and I need to take an online PD. What would that be? Carol, thoughts on your end? Wow.
Sure. It's really funny. When we first started We Teach CS about 3 years ago, first we started by polling our area school district leaders, and we gave them a list of options. What did they want? If I could get money to support computer science education in their schools and teacher PD, what would they want us to do? And I had them rank order like a list of 10 things. And the number one thing they said was, we need help getting teachers certified, because in the state of Texas, there is a certification exam, which is essentially the same thing as the CS Praxis exam in other states, that people have to pass in order to be certified to teach AP Computer Science A or Computer Science 1. And so we started with face-to-face PD that was kind of like certification prep. We went through all the competencies. We said, here's all the content you need. We created kind of a study guide, and then we had a 2-day drink through a fire hose of here's all of the content that's measured on that test. And we had teachers that were traveling like literally 1,000 miles round trip to come to the training. And so that's when I said, man, we've got to put this online, because Texas is really big, and there's just no way that we can do a road show to get this out to everyone, given how many of our rural teachers have really access to nothing. So we created our online course, The Foundations of Computer Science for Teaching. But the reason we did it was simply because I thought that was like for efficiency purposes. I didn't think of it as being as equal or better quality. And then what we did was we actually did research, and we looked at all of the teachers, hundreds of teachers that have gone through our program, either taking the face-to-face course, the online course, both courses, or neither course. And all of those teachers said, I want to get certified. And then we looked at, well, which experiences actually were the most likely to lead to certification. And what we found out was that there was no difference between the online course and the face-to-face course. They were equally as likely to get achieve certification if they did either the face-to-face or the online. And of course, more likely if they did both. But, and then when we dug deeper into it, we found out that where that came from was with the online course, we have hundreds of extra practice questions, and there was a direct linear correlation between how much extra time you spent in those practice questions online and your likelihood of achieving certification. And that was regardless of whether you started with a 0 on the pretest or started with 100 on a pretest. Both of those were equally correlated to the degree to which you interacted with all of the modules in the practice questions. So what I found out was, even though I kind of thought, oh, well, online is going to be, quite frankly, less quality, but we had to do it for efficiency's sake, what I found out was the online course has actually been hugely valuable for people, not just because it gives them the opportunity to access CS professional development when they never could, but also because it allows people to do it on their own terms. They can do it, you know, at the speed that they'd like. They can repeat the videos. They can take quizzes 2 or 3 times over and over again. They can try all of the additional practice questions. And that's just simply not possible in face-to-face. It's just, it would be exhausting to do all of that in a face-to-face environment, and it would be expensive and really time-consuming. So I've just found that the online gives people the opportunity to really kind of structure their learning to meet their own personal needs much better actually than the face-to-face has, because in the face-to-face we're just kind of having to plow through a high volume of content pretty quickly. And that was surprising to me because I was kind of a skeptic, quite frankly.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Brooke. I'd like to get some audience input into this. What are your thoughts as if you have gone online or if you've gone face-to-face? There were some really good points that our guest brought out today. Like Brooke was saying, focusing on specific, you know, if you're going online, what kind of online training is there? And Carol was talking about the study that they did is, you know, the going through the practice questions on each module brought greater success. So again, that kind of ties in what Brooke and Carol are both saying is when you're going online, there are pieces that are, you need to pay attention to what pieces that online offers. Similarly, when you go on a face-to-face, there are certain pieces that workshop offers which are very valuable. So would a blended approach be better if you could grab those pieces? Thoughts from the audience? I see Deborah typing. Hopefully she's going to ask us a question. And others, should we start calling out our participants and see if they would want to ask questions? We would love to hear from you guys. This is very important that we get your input.
So Deborah put in the chat box, I think that well-designed online content can provide differentiated instruction so that educators can explore more deeply or more extensively.
Absolutely, yeah.
The other thing I also wanted to add too was just from my own experience, and I think Brooke started to touch upon it earlier about, doing PD in your pajamas. And I think that there's also this sense of, at least for me, when I do stuff online, when I attend professional developments, when I go to webinars, I try to put myself into as much of a professional mode as possible, because if I sit there in my pajamas, I'm likely not going to take it as seriously. And I thought that was just sort of an interesting comment. And so just wanted to put that out there too.
Point very well made. There's another comment, I think, in the chat box.
Good point, Deborah.
So Deborah,
Deborah said we've offered PD that is supplemental material online, or you can attend in the snowstorm, helpful in New England. That is very true. We don't typically have those here in San Francisco. So so being able to do that in cold weather is helpful.
Right. Very, very valid. And then, we've talked so much about modeling. Maybe that would help us when the schools shut down so often in a year because of snowstorm, and we lose such valuable time. Maybe we can figure out creative ways of just holding one online, an hour of online session with our students and see if that will take care of things. So the next question, one that's very dear to my heart, because one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do as a community ambassador at the CS for All Teachers, a community of practice, is this. So I'm really, really interested in listening to everybody's opinion on this. How do you create a community among teachers who have attended your PD? What is a recipe to create a community? What works? What does not work? Brooke, let's start with you. I know that Code.org has a very thriving community. I know personally from the various groups that I work with, teachers say with pride, I'm a Code.org. I went for a Code.org professional development. I belong to the community. So maybe you can share some thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is that there isn't like a magic formula. You have to be really intentional about building community. There isn't a community I have been a part of that sort of emerged as an afterthought. I think that people look for relationships and connections and community with folks that they feel comfortable with and folks that they feel that they have something in common with, and making participants feel comfortable and showing those areas of commonality and showing how there is benefit in the reciprocal relationships that come out of participating in an extended community is, I think, a really important piece of getting people to understand the value and getting people to actually have value. This isn't about like tricking teachers into thinking there's value. It's about actually providing value through the community. And I think that can only come once folks are comfortable being vulnerable and once people are comfortable actually sharing their ideas and questions and things like that. So I would say for us, we think about community really as something that comes as a natural progression when you put people together, when you encourage them and give them space to sort of like exist as human beings together, not just as participants in a workshop, but as individuals and as people, and make those personal connections. That makes professional community a lot easier when you feel some sort of personal connection with the people that you're talking to. And it also makes it a lot easier to sort of reveal that you have questions and reveal that you don't know all of the answers when you have that level of comfort. So that's the biggest thing, is I would say look for places where you can be yourself and where you are being encouraged to really engage with other educators and other teachers in your peer group, because that is, I think, the best place for communities to develop. The other piece of this is that not everyone wants to engage in a community in the same way, and that has to be okay. You can't build a one-size-fits-all community, and I think the CS for All Teachers community is a great example of this, where some people can exist as lurkers, other people can exist as contributors, other people can exist as leaders. There are many ways that you can exist in the community, and I would encourage you to look for communities that give you those multiple entry points, because the reality is that people just need different things out of community and have different amounts that they are able to give, just in terms of like cycles and time. So I think that's another key piece, not looking for a one-size-fits-all community, but looking for something that's respectful of you and your needs and also going to give you what you need. And like I said before, I think the best way to get that is for people to really be comfortable with each other and have space and time to get to know each other personally, and not just be participants in a workshop or participants in a community, but individuals who are communing together because they have this shared mission or this shared goal and have perspectives that each.
Great. And Carol, thoughts on yours before we ask the group.
Yeah, I think that this idea of creating community, I mean, it's actually core to what I've been doing for 20 years in STEM Teacher PD. We run a program called the Texas Regional Collaboratives, which we have 60 plus math and science collaboratives all over the state of Texas, and we actually built We Teach CS on that model, really have leveraged kind of that community that Code started building, because we're also a code.org partner, with that idea of having something that people, like a brand that people are a part of. And by brand, I'm not meaning like selling something, but more like an identifiable concept that people are a part of. For those of you who are professional development providers, that's hugely important. And, that's why, although in our computer science work, we have a lot of online opportunities, we also have this blended model that is additional face-to-face as well. And I know, so Ellen said she's part of 2 of our CS collaboratives here in the Central Texas area. And I don't know if, I think June said she was from Pearland. She may be part of a collaborative as well. I'm not sure, but this idea of being with a cohort of people that are all working at something very hard, taking on a challenge, is, I think, really huge. And what we've seen is that I think one of the reasons we've been so successful at getting, we've increased the number of certified computer science teachers by like 600% over the last 5 years in the state of Texas. And I think part of that is because we're not doing it one teacher at a time. These teachers are joining a collaborative, for the most part, not all of them, but many of them are joining a collaborative. They're joining with 20 other teachers who are also struggling to learn the content in order to be successful on the certification exam. So they're working together. They've kind of made this public commitment to each other that they're all going to, get certified by the end of their experience. They have a project director who is both pushing them and pulling them to kind of get across the line as part of that community, in part because I'm holding that project director accountable. So all of that works in this flywheel effect to kind of just accelerate people beyond when it really starts getting hard, to push through the hard stuff and stick with it so that you achieve your goals in the end. And that's what community can do. I think another key feature is, after a professional development, continuing to stay connected with that group, and CS for All Teachers does a great job of doing that. In Texas, we do that with our We Teach CS blog. So we have like a once a week, email that goes out that says, here's all the cool stuff that's happening, because we're adding new PD all the time. Or it might not be our stuff. It might be something that code.org is doing, or it might be something that BJC is offering, or You Teach CS, or CS for All Teachers, CSTA. So we share that through the blog, and then we ask other people to share with us what's happening, so that people feel like they're part of this larger statewide network, which we never really had in Texas. We had a lot of, a handful of great CS teachers in pockets around the state that knew each other, and no one knew them beyond that small network. So anyway, I think that sense of community, that's actually we have 5 kind of core foundational principles that we teach CS is built on, and building community is one of them.
Fantastic. I really think this is probably, to me, I think what really sustains a teacher to continue teaching computer science is the community. For me personally, that's my story. And I cannot emphasize enough how much the CS for All teachers has made me wanting to continue and really take pride in myself as a professional and as someone who wants to keep doing and contributing to the community. Being part of the CS for All teachers has probably been the single biggest service that I feel I've been able to provide for the computer science education community. That being said, we are at 8:26. I would like to give the audience about 2 minutes, please, if you would talk, share your thoughts. I know Ellen has posted something there, and then I'll hand the floor back to Joey.
It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So Carol and Brooke, do you want to have a few final thoughts? And then I'll just go through a few housekeeping things.
Sure, I'll go ahead. You know, I think what the concept that we started with at the beginning when we're asking about, you know, what kind of professional development experiences should you get involved in. You know, in CS education, it's almost, and then in education in general, it's almost like the best of times and the worst of times. It's the best of times from the perspective of the CS education movement, but, you know, as a former teacher myself, as a current...
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.
Oops. It's also a very tough time to be an educator because you feel like you're under assault. And so it's hugely important that, that we stick together as a community and demand the best quality professional development and nothing less than that from the people providing it to us. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Carol. Brooke?
Before I speak, I'm going to apologize. There's a marching band going past my house right now, so you might hear music in the background. I could not agree with Carol more. I think that this is a time where we have sort of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to interest in computer science education, and as folks who have been thinking about and working in this space for quite a while, it's great for us to see the shift in interest towards computer science, but it does mean that there's a lot of noise that a teacher needs to sort through to find something that's going to work for her. So I think the biggest piece of advice that I have, and I say this not as a Code.org employee, I say this as a person who has worked on CS principles, you know, for over a decade. I cannot encourage you strongly enough to look for opportunities that that are framed around structures that you know work for you. And there's no magic bullet for learning how to teach a new course. There's no secret potion for like the exact perfect PD. What works for you might not be what works for other people, but you need to know how you learn best. And you should lean into how you learn best when you're looking for professional learning opportunities. And if that means online, then that means online. If it means in person, that means in person. But I would, before you do anything, I would start by thinking about what you need as a person in order to feel supported and in order to be able to have the structure that you need to succeed here, and use that as your first thing to whittle down opportunities to find what's going to work best for you. And I certainly agree that as the community of providers, it is our responsibility to give all teachers access to the most equitable and most productive professional learning opportunities that we can. So I think that you have a lot of things to sort through and choose from, and the community is here, going back to that community piece, to talk about their experiences and to help you make that decision if you are deciding which to go with. But like I said, the first thing you can do is be honest with yourself and true to yourself and how you learn. So that you can't go wrong if you start with that.
Great. Thank you. Yes, we all hear the band. There's a question that I wanted to be sure to respond to. Al Wooten, you'd asked that we were going to list a list of summer PD opportunities. I deliberately stayed away from them because there are so many, and I didn't want to highlight one over the other in the genuine fear of having missed out one. But here is what we will do. At the link that Joey has given us, there is a mini blog that we have, and please log in into CS for All Teachers, and there we'll have a list of all the PD opportunities that are available this summer. And I hope that would be even more useful than just discussing them, because that way you'll have the ability to go and look for those opportunities and see what meets your needs and research on it in your own time. With that being said, Joey, the floor is now yours.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Carol and Brooke, for being a part of this, and Deepa, thank you for hosting as usual. We will post the recording of this onto that blog. I'll tweet it out later on. If you could take just 2 minutes to fill out the survey, these surveys really help us inform, how we can improve, how we can make things better for the future. And so thank you for just taking time out of your day. I know it's end of the day for many of you on the East Coast, and thank you for just being a part of the CS for All Teachers community. I hope you all have a wonderful Monday evening, and we will all chat later. Take care, everyone.
Carol, Brooke, thank you very much.